wanted to tell the story of my family on my dad's side. My old great-grandfather, Jacob Herman, he left, his parents sent him from Germany over to what was then starting the United States. He was only 17 years old then. That was in 1827.
Wow.
He was born in 1827, and he left Germany and came to the United States in 1844. So he was 17 years old when he came over, and he worked around the coast there. My dad said he told about living in New York City, and then joining a wagon train coming west to what was the end of what so-called civilization was St. Louis, Missouri. And he went to work for a company, American Fur Company. At that time, they were sending hunters back out into the mountains over here in the western part of the United States to get the furs from different types of animals and send them back, I guess, made coats out of them, different things. And he slowly worked his way over and wound up in St. Joe, Missouri. And he hooked up with an Indian woman there. She was part French. Her dad was a Frenchman came down from Canada. His name was Joe Tesson, and he had a little Indian blood in him from a tribe from Iowa. Tama, Iowa still has a little Indian reservation there that was where this Tesson was from. And he came west also, and he married up with an Indian woman, and that's where my great-grandmother came from. And she married Jacob Herman. And my grandfather was born there at St. Joe, Missouri. And so I had relatives from those tribes that there's still little reservations in the north and east part of Kansas. Potawatomis. There's parts of my family on my dad's side were Potawatomis, and my dad lived in Oklahoma as a young man. They sent him to school in Kansas, and that's how he knew some people there that he was actually related to. And so when the First World War came, he joined the military and was in the Navy during the First World War. And back then, the Indians were not considered American citizens, but a lot of the American Indians went ahead and volunteered in the military to go to fight the Germans in the First World War. And my dad used to talk about being in battles on the ocean against the German Navy. And then as the war progressed, they needed more troops to fight the Germans on land, so they asked for volunteers. So my dad volunteered and became a Marine, and he went through France and into Belgium as they advanced, pushing the German troops back. And when they finally got the Germans back across the Rhine River there in Belgium, the Germans had surrendered. That was November 11th. It was known as Armistice Day, 1918. My dad, since he was born in 1895, he was 23 years old when the war ended. Then he came back. They brought him back to the United States, and he continued to live in Oklahoma. And only recently, my cousin I have in Cheyenne, Wyoming, had sent some picture that I was really happy to get. You know, it's back then people didn't take too much interest I don't have a picture of my grandmother on my dad's side because she was an Indian, and she was superstitious about having her picture taken. She felt like they were going to hold part of her, you know, speared or whatever.
That's great.
And so we never did have a picture of her, but I do have pictures on my mother's side. As a matter of fact, my grandmother on my mother's side was the daughter of a chief. His name was the Americans at the time. They were intermingling with the Indian tribes, and they gave them names, you know, because the Indians went by name. When they were babies, the parents named them something like after an eagle, maybe Wombly in our language, eagle. Maybe that would be your name, you know. There was no last names or first names. And this chief, they called him Joseph Good Cane Milk. And that was the name that the English people gave him. And his daughter was my grandmother, on my mother's side. And so she married a man that was from the tribes in Oklahoma. He was of Ponca tribe. Back then, the Poncas had a tribe. The tribes were located in northern Nebraska, but the government had relocated that tribe and sent them to Oklahoma because they had some worthless land in Oklahoma where they sent all the Indians, and then they discovered oil there.
Oh.
So that kind of turned out to be lucky for some of those Indian tribes in Oklahoma. They had oil wells on their land. And anyway, my grandfather, since he married the chief's daughter, he was allowed to be registered up there in South Dakota in the Rosebud tribe. So he was registered as a Rosebud tribe. Actually, he was a Ponca Indian. So we were all kind of mixed up like that. You know, we had French blood, German blood, Indian. You know, and that was the way the people coming in there, different tribes, intermingling. There was my grandfather, Jacob. He finally wound up in what was back then known as Dakota Territory, which is now the state of Wyoming. He was working for the government, for the tribe, for the army. He always worked for the army, and as a fixer-upper. They said he could fix anything, a sewing machine and whatever they had, he was able to fix those. And so he lived at what is Fort Laramie, Wyoming. And when I travel up through there, I used to always like to stop there and just walk around the old fort, which they keep it up, a historical site. And I used to just like to walk around there knowing that my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and his siblings all grew up in that area, you know, and it was, so that was kind of interesting. And he was one of the interesting parts about my grandfather. His name was Frank Herman. As a young man, as a 17-year-old, he rode as an interpreter with cavalry, and they patrolled that area of Wyoming up into Montana and those areas where Indians were scattered. And he was actually at the Custer battlefield 3 days
Wow.
after that Custer was wiped out. When they got there, they were still burying the bodies of all the soldiers that were killed there. The Indians, they came and took their dead away and buried them like they would any other time one of their people died. So I have an interesting family history there of the settlement of South Dakota back. going to tell you about when my dad had a little farm there in Melvis Camp, and I was just maybe 12, 13 years old, maybe around there, when I used to follow him around quite a bit, and he put me to work. So I could harness up the horses. We had a couple of big grays. They were nice big horses. And hook them up to the farm machinery, whatever we were doing. If we were putting up hay, we'd have to mow the hay down first. And then we'd come back and rake and leave the hay in rows of where we could come back with the hay rack next. And that you had to do by hand. You had to get down and using a fork, throw the hay up in the hay rack to haul it back down to the yard. And we had to do that in the winter and in the summertime, because you were doing that to feed your animals through the winter. And then early, after the weather warmed up, then we had to get out in the fields and cultivate, get those fields planted with whatever was going to go in. It was corn sometimes, and wheat, different kinds of things to that is what we made some money off of, because we could sell that wheat and the corn. Some of it we used for our own animals and for our own use. And so farming was a lot of work, but it was good work. I liked it. I would have been a farmer, I think, if that Second World War didn't come along, where my dad sold all his farm out, and then he went to work for the government. At that time, during the war, they were building airfields all over in all the little towns around. So that's what my dad followed, and worked for the government.
And Tom, when you were working in the fields, you were 12 years old?
Yeah, I was around, about 11, 12 in there, because I was trying to figure out the ages at when I was in the 7th grade. I don't know what year, how old I was then, but we had quit farming then, and my dad had got a job up in northern South Dakota as a policeman, and so we lived up there. And my mom was actually the jailer. She cooked for the prisoners, and there too I helped her in preparing the food. She had to peel potatoes, and we had to roast, grind coffee.
Oh, wow.
And
How many cells did they have at the jail? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I don't even remember going into the jail part.
Sounds like Mayberry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's what it made.
And that agency was called the Cheyenne River Agency. they built a dam here that all went underwater.
Oh.
So they moved that agency west about 40, 50 miles to a place called Eagle Butte, and that's the agency now. But that was the kind of work I always liked to work wherever we went, and we wound up in Rosebud Agency. My dad was still working for the government, and then I got up to age of my draft age during that Korean War, and so I enlisted in the Air Force, and they took us down to. That was the first time I flew. They flew us down to San Antonio, Texas. And that was in the middle of July. It was hot down there. But we spent about a month or two down there in San Antonio.
That was your boot camp?
Yeah.
And you were 18? 18?
It was 1952.
So you were 18 years old?
No, I was already 20.
20.
Yeah. And after that boot camp, they sent me to Amarillo. There was an air base there where they was teaching aircraft mechanics, and that's what they put me in. They give you all kinds of tests to know what you're good at, and they'll send you to the, like I went in with two guys, two of my friends, and I never did see them because they send them off into different jobs. You know, one was a cook, and another one came out as a truck driver. And they wound up in California. But when I finished that training as a jet engine mechanic, they give you a couple choices where you might want to be stationed. So I picked one down in Louisiana, another one right here in New Mexico. These bases were already here, and then one day just before we finished training, they came over and told me to report to the commanding officer. And what it's all about. I had to go back to the barracks, take a shower, change into my dress uniform to report to the commander. And he said, I got a letter here from a congressman in South Dakota, and he wants you stationed in Rapid City, South Dakota. I guess my dad had pulled strings up there. He knew a congressman, and so they had me sent to Rapid City. At that time, that air base was called Weaver Air Force Base. And while I was there, the commanding officer was a pilot, and he was flying in one of the bombers that we had at the base, and it crashed up in the Iceland someplace.
Oh.
And he got killed. So then they changed the name of that air base, Rapid City. I can't remember what it's called now anymore. But It was named after that general. And we, after that training, after the certain time, they send you out different places, and so they sent me to North Africa, and I was to report to a base in New Jersey, where the troops assembled there, and then when we got as many as they wanted, they put us on a board of a ship there in New York City, and we went across the Atlantic. It took us 9 days to get to North Africa. We one morning we come into a port there, and it said it was Casablanca, and that's where I was stationed there for 1 year as out in the desert there. There's an air base out there. Back then, it was the start of the Cold War, and so these bombers were loaded with nuclear bombs, atomic bombs they called them back then, and flying 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We were ready to retaliate if Russia had tried to bomb one of our cities or one of our allies. So that I used to think later on. I used to think we would retaliate. That meant that they were going to hit us. They would fire their weapons in, and maybe New York City or someplace would have been wiped out, and then we would have went in and wiped out Moscow, and so would have been a bad situation, because that was during the Second World War. The United States had used the atomic bomb in Japan, and we knew what they would do, what the bombs would do. So it was a bad situation. With these wars, I don't know. I don't know why these governments have to have wars. It just goes on and on. Based in New Jersey, waiting to be sent overseas. We didn't know where we were going, but when the day came, and they took a group of us in buses down to the port, and later I found out it was in New Jersey, because I thought I was going to be able to see the
send off.
the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, yeah.
On the way out, but we was way out, already past that point, and we got on the boat, and took us 9 days of, but we was lucky. We had good weather. I remember we used to enjoy coming out to the railing and watch the fishes. What do they call those?
Dolphins?
Fishes that
Dolphins?
dolphins. Yeah, They followed along all the way across 2,000 miles out in the ocean. These dolphins are just swimming along, just having fun, you know. And one day we got up in the morning and we was coming into a port, and they said we were arriving in Casablanca, North Africa. So that didn't mean anything to us, you know. We were just like cattle. We just went along wherever they took us, and they put us on trucks, and I remember going down the road. We were sitting in a truck, canvas-covered trucks, and they took us to the base where we were going to be stationed. It was called Sidi Slimane. The city was spelled S-I-D-I. Slimane, S-L-I-M-A-N-E. And it was about 20, 30 miles inland from the west coast of Africa. And out there was this air base that the United States had built that had bombers, and back then they were the B-25s, I believe it was. My memory's getting kind of foggy, but these bombers were loaded with atomic bombs.
Oh boy.
And they were flying 24/7. And we were back then. There was threats from Russia. It was then that it's called I can't even remember the name of it.
Cold War. Cold War.
Yeah, it was during the Cold War, and so we were ready to with our bombs and planes in the air all the time. That kept the Russians from wanting to attack, because that was after that Cuban deal, and we were afraid that Russia might send missiles over to the United States to bomb the United States. So we were there ready to attack Russia.
And how old were you, Tom? When you were there working on the planes with the nuclear bombs, how old were you?
I was about 23 years old, I guess.
Wow.
And I was stationed with a fighter plane squadron, and what we were, our main mission was to protect the base, to protect the planes that were there, the bombers. We had nuclear bombs that were on this base. So our mission was, if any planes were coming in to attack us, our planes would go up and try to get them, knock them down, get them out of the way, so they couldn't come in and do any damage reason for this base out there in the middle of Africa where you wouldn't think anything. This was during the Korean War. And back over in Korea, it was fighting hand battles against the North Koreans. And so we had a mission there, and I was the crew chief on one of our fighter planes, which was an F-86. F-86 fighter planes. They were equipped with 50 caliber machine guns, and you could hang bombs on under the wings. You could hang air-to-air missiles, whatever it took. War is war, you know. It's a terrible thing. Everybody's out to kill, you know. You didn't kill the enemy; he was going to kill you. And one general had said one of the smartest things I ever heard. He said, "If you're over here to fight for your country," he said, "you'll probably die over here. But if you're here to fight for your life," he said, "you probably go home." And I think that's what that was something that I think was true. That many of our boys survived those years. And to this day, we're still having problems with Russia. I don't know why communism is political thing that's just they want is it be like us or die.
Tom, was that base ever attacked? Was that while you were there? Was that base ever attacked?
No, we were never threatened.
I think didn't you say that?
We had some times when we had to send our fighter planes out because we were on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I remember living in tents for the whole year. We lived in tents, and the temperature would get up to 120 degrees some days. There was no such thing as air conditioning. During our days off, sometimes we go to the PX, the Post Exchange, where we could sit inside there and have some drink beer and have some sandwiches, and they had swamp coolers there, so we felt fairly comfortable under those conditions. We thought that it was a way to cool things off. But when we was at our barracks, no, there was no kind. We used to go into the shower with a sheet wrapped around us, get us soaking wet with cold water, and that way you kept partly cool. But it was weird because we were out in the Sahara Desert, North Africa, and the days would be 120 degrees, and the nights around 60 degrees. So you needed blankets to cover up at night to keep warm. It was weird, but we put up up with that for a whole year. And one day came when I said, you've served your year and we're sending you back to the States. And sent me from the base where I was. We got on a train, and we rode a train to Casablanca. And there was another air base there where we were put on planes to fly to the United States. And that was better than the 9 days of traveling across the ocean. And this way we flew across the Atlantic Ocean in 1 day. And it was a long day because we were headed west. And so we kept up with the sun in a way, and made the day long. And in the evening we landed in Springfield, Massachusetts. And there they paid us a few bucks and gave us some airline tickets so we could get to our homes. Because we were given 30 days leave. And so I caught a plane to Omaha, Nebraska. That was the closest I could get to where I lived in Rosebud, South Dakota. My parents were living in Rosebud then. So we flew from Springfield, Massachusetts to Omaha, Nebraska. And that was the first time I was ever in an airplane, back in the 50s, when we flew through a thunderstorm and we were actually struck by lightning. But for some reason the plane continued to operate. We landed in Omaha, and so that one whole day I flew from Casablanca, South Africa to Omaha, Nebraska. It was a long day, and it was around midnight, I guess I was in Omaha, and from there I had to get a bus. And so I got on a bus, and it took me a whole day riding on a bus to go from Omaha to Valentine, Nebraska, where I finally got home to see my parents after being gone for a couple of years. That was quite an experience. I never really regretted doing that. I thought it was something a lot of young people should experience.
And you were drafted, Tom, right?
Yeah,
You were drafted.
yeah. I think that's. When I got back from overseas, I had orders to report to Laredo Air Force Base, Texas. And I I had a 30-day leave at home, so I spent that at home, and while I was there, my mom bought me a car. She bought me a '53 Ford, and that was in 1954. So it was a fairly new car, and I drove that down from Rosebud to Laredo, and I was stationed there as an aircraft mechanic, and we had T-33s. They were two-seat jet aircraft that trained new pilots in. And so we as mechanics, we took care of them. We was assigned to a certain group of airplanes that we had to service every day. That was our job, to get out to the runways there and get the planes ready to go, and fuel them up. That was our main job. Was when the planes would go out, they'd come back, we had to fuel them up and get them ready for the next flight, because all day long they was in and out. And they had pilots there, not only Americans, they had French and different countries that they wanted their pilots to learn to fly jets. The Americans trained them, and so it was, a job, just 8 to 5, and of course we was right there on the border, so we used to go across the border into Mexico and go to the clubs for dancing and meet girls and things young guys do, and I'm trying to think of things not ordinary, but everyday life. It was nothing exciting. I did see a couple of times. I seen our planes would crash, pilots killed, and it was just kind of a normal thing you see in the Air Force, where especially new pilots learning to fly, sometimes they'll goof up, or something will happen to the plane, and that was the difference of and living down there near the Mexican border. Over 80% of the people living in Laredo were Mexican, and Spanish-speaking people, and then there's English too, because schools taught English, like the high schools there were Mexican kids going to school there. They had to learn to speak English in their started in their grade schools, because I learned that later as I lived among them, and uh, we used to be under strict rules, regulations about how to treat the people. We had to respect the local people, show them respect, and because we were actually there in their territory, their home, and it was one of the things that they used to tell us. Even when we was overseas, we had to do the same thing to the people over there. And I met my wife while I was stationed down there. I always remember that day I met her. We went to a movie, and me and a friend of mine. This guy was from North Dakota, and him and I went to a movie. The movie was Love is a Many Splendored Thing. I remember that. There was even a song by that name, and it's a great song. I've got it on my computer as one of the songs I like to listen to now and then. And anyway, after the movie, we came out, and there's a coffee shop right near that movie house where young people used to gather there. We went over and we had coffee and donuts, and it was getting late, so we was going to go back to the base. So we started out. And, there was a gas station a couple blocks away, and we pulled in there to use the restroom. And here come a couple of girls walking down the street there. And this friend of mine knew one of them, so he hollered at her, and they came over, and we were visiting, and we decided that we asked the girls if they'd like to go with us to drive-in and have a Coke or something, and so they agreed. And my wife used to laugh about one of the things that happened is my friend he knew this one girl, so they climbed in the back seat, had this four-door car, anyway, before they got in, this one girl asked my wife if she wanted to sit with me or with the other guy. And my wife said, I don't care, I'm not going to marry the guy. And it turned out about a year later we got married. But anyway, that's how I met her, and she lived with her parents there and worked in one of the stores in town there. She had graduated from the high school, so she could speak good English, and we never talked about marriage or anything like that. All the time I knew her there, it was probably close to a year, before I was discharged there. And I left in July of '56. I got discharged down there in Laredo. And I already had a job waiting for me in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So I went home, back up to South Dakota, took my military clothes, and left them there with my parents. Visited them a few days, and I had to be in Cheyenne, Wyoming, to go to work at the airport there in Cheyenne as an aircraft mechanic. And I had a cousin that lived in Cheyenne, and that's how I found out about that job, because they had told my dad about the company there that was hiring, and so then that's how I got the job. And I worked with them until the following year. They were going to move to California, and I didn't want to go to California, so I quit them and went to Wichita, Kansas, and I got on work there with the Boeing Airplane Company in Wichita. And then while I was in Wichita, then I took a week off, and I went to Laredo to visit my girlfriend, Lupe, and we decided to get married. So we rushed through the whatever we had to do, go get blood tests, go get the license, and we got married in February of 1957, and I brought her back to Wichita with me, and we lived there. We rented a little 2-bedroom house in a little town connected to Wichita called Hayesville, and we lived there until our firstborn was coming along, and the doctor there in Wichita that was taking her to her was he didn't like the fact that her blood pressure was up, and he was afraid. And then we got a layoff, so we had to leave. And my folks, my parents, they knew they had relatives in Oklahoma, so they said, go down to Ponca City, and there's an Indian hospital down there. You could go there and they wouldn't charge you anything. So we did that. We sold what furniture we had there, and went down to Ponca City, and and I took her to the Indian hospital at Pawnee, Oklahoma, and sure enough, the doctor, after he examined her, he said, I want to keep her here. He says it's going to be a month yet before the baby is born, but we want to keep her in the hospital. We want to get her blood pressure down. So So I had to leave her there, and it's about 30 miles from Pawnee to Ponca City. So I had to drive back and forth. I'd go down about once a week. I'd go down to visit her, and this place we was renting, the guy had a little gas station there, and he had some cabins. Back then they didn't call them motels; they were called cabins. And so I worked for him at his store, and then he had houses around town. So I was a pretty good carpenter, and I knew carpenter and plumbing because I had worked at that before I left Rosebud to join the service. So I worked for him there, and when the baby was born, she came through okay. So we brought the baby Alice back to Ponca City with us, and we lived there till I finally decided to move back to Rosebud, and we moved back to Rosebud, and I went to work for the agency as a maintenance man, and after a few months they made me the foreman of the maintenance crew. So we lived in the government house there, and the folks, my parents lived there, and my sister and her husband, they lived in Pine Ridge, which is about 80, 90 miles west of Rosebud. And so we was home there. We had relatives there. I had relatives there. And Loopy was, she had a personality that people really liked her. And so she got along real good with the neighbors, neighbor ladies, and they liked the fact that she was Mexican and could speak Spanish. Because back then, there wasn't any of that around up there. Mexican food, nobody knew about that. The stores, we didn't have Chili's or anything like that. So when she would cook for her friends, and they they really liked her. She got along real good there until a job opening came up down here in New Mexico. So I decided if I moved to New Mexico, I'll be closer to Loopy's parents. Still were living in Laredo. They were still living then. So we'll be halfway down to Laredo if we move to New Mexico. So that worked out pretty good for us. We came down here, and I liked the people here. The Indians here were the Pueblo tribes. There's about I forget how many, 20 different Pueblos, and I worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs as started out as the maintenance foreman up, and then I worked my way up to be a plant manager. And I worked at the area office as an engineering technician. That was about every day job was traveling throughout New Mexico. We had we had pueblos around New Mexico and different tribes, the Navajo, the Apaches, Pueblos, and each one of those tribes where they had schools and agencies that we took care of their facilities. So I liked the job. I really did. I enjoyed working for them. And but then Loopy had gotten sick, so I had enough time and grade in service, so I retired. I was only 55 years old when I retired from my federal job. And then I turned around and I contracted doing practically the same thing for the government, but as a contractor. But there I had to hire the people. I was responsible for hiring and doing the job, having my people do the jobs. So that kept me busy. I tell you, I always thought I never worked so hard. All the years I worked for the government, I was an easy job. You know, it wasn't a hard job at all. And but when I contracted, sometimes I had to do my own job. Steve, my son Steve, was working for us here, and there'd be times when he wouldn't show up for work. I had to go down and fill in for him. He was out to California, and then he came back and went to work for us here. When we had a contract for one of the schools. So I guess that's probably about it. I retired from that job and bought a home here in Albuquerque, and I stayed here. I never thought about going back to South Dakota. I didn't quite like the winters up there. And I did tell my wife that if she wanted to, we could have went to Laredo, Texas, and lived down there with her family, around her family. But she didn't want to do that. She was happy just staying away from her family. They could come to visit, and we could go down there and visit them, and we didn't have to be right next door to them. So, but we always enjoyed going down there. The food was great. Of course, here in New Mexico too, you can't beat the green chili. So And here I am, after all these years of retirement, I'm still drawing my I wanted to tell you about why I was born in my grandpa's house, Melk's Camp, known as Melk's Camp. And my grandpa on my mother's side, he had built this 2-story house for $900 right after 1900s, right in there someplace. So, but we didn't have any electricity, no running water. There was a well, but there was no pump, so we had to hoist the water out of the well with a bucket. And the house, we did have a big barn. It was set up for farming, you know, and a chicken coop, and other outhouses. And it was nice living down there along the creek. Nearest neighbor was about a mile away. And as a boy growing up, I had that whole area. There was a creek running through where I used to fish. I'd take my friends fishing down there along the creek, charge them about a nickel a fish. And wintertime, it was rough because we burned wood, and there was just one big heater in the living room area, and in the kitchen, my mom had a cook stove which burned wood too, and so we'd go to bed at night. My dad would stoke up the fires. And but after a while, the flames would go out, and if it was 0 degrees outside, towards the morning, it would be probably freezing, and we knew it was freezing because the water in the buckets in the kitchen would have ice on it, and I remember my dad he used to kind of joke about it because he'd get up in the morning with these long underwear on and running around starting the fire. And after he got the fire going and everybody was under covers, and when it kind of warmed up, then we could get up, you know.
How many people lived in your house, Tom?
What?
How many people were in your house?
Just 4 of us.
4?
Yeah, my sister. There was 4 of us, my sister and I, and my mom and my dad. That was, my mom and dad and I, we had beds downstairs. My sister, she she had a bedroom upstairs, and she never did complain about it being cold. Because there was no heat upstairs, but you know, some heat manages to go from the downstairs up to the upstairs. So I guess she never did freeze. But I remember in the summer times we used to have some. South Dakota is known for its thunderstorms. You know, we'd get hail, rain, and wind. So we had a cellar right outside of the kitchen door. So if a storm come, we would go out down into the cellar and sit down there until the storm went by. But in all those years we lived there, there never was any damage done to the house from the storms. I remember lightning hit pretty close around and knocked some bricks off the chimney one time. And, used to have my dad had to have a antenna.
Lightning rods.
Because he had a little old battery powered radio, you know. And one night lightning hit, and the next morning that wire, it just fell straight down, and you could see where the ashes from the wire was strung out on the ground. Lightning was.
Did you guys have lightning rods on the house? Do you remember the old lightning rods?
No, we didn't. We didn't have. They were available, but.
I always thought those were scary. Do you remember those on? Yeah. On the old house, they have lightning rods.
Yeah.
Do they draw the lightning to them? Is that what
Right. Yeah. Draw the lightning to those instead of it striking something else. And on your roof.
But this house was down in the valley, and in order to get out of there, you had to go up a pretty steep hill. To get up on the hill, and then down the hill on the other side, back down to creek level. And but my dad had this old trail, and he only had a shovel. He would try to keep the ruts filled so he could get in and out of that place. I remember if he was low on gas, if his car was low on gas, he used to have a gas tank. Used to be at about level with what is now the dashboard. So if you was going up the hill, the gas wouldn't flow to the carburetor because it was just gravity feed. So he would run out of gas. So he would go in reverse. In reverse, the tank was higher than the engine, so that he would back up the hill. You know.
And what year was that, Tom?
That was in the 30s, late 30s, and then he had this one old car that I can remember when he turned something on the magneto, they called it. When he turned it on, you could hear it clicking, and that provided the spark for the starting. And then he would jack up the rear wheel and turn the wheel to start the engine, put it in gear, you know, and that way the engine would start. We had these crazy things like that. And another one we had was that had the crank in the front. And I remember my mom, she would crank that thing up and get it started, and we'd go down to the school, which is about a mile away, and there was always something going on there. The government had provided, they'd built a dam about 5 miles from where we lived, and put in irrigation ditches so that down there around the school, down along the low places, they had gardens, and it was irrigated. So summertime, the community would get together and plant this garden and can the food. The whole community would benefit from that, from the gardens. So we got along pretty good that way, but the thing that ruined everything, I think we'd have stayed there if that Second World War didn't start. I think it was 1942 when the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and that people scattered out, to go to work for the government, and so that was the end of that activities we had down there along the Pompo Creek. But I was only about 13 years old, I guess, somewhere around there when we moved away from there. And the old home place, some other parts of people from the family had moved in there, and we moved up about 4 miles north to a place where my mom had some land, and she had a little house on it. So we moved in there. It was about a mile from St. Charles, and we was there for just a year or two, and then my dad got a job up north. I think I mentioned that before, where we moved about 150 miles north to close to the North Dakota border, and my sister and I went to school there, and we went to a public school. And I think we was in the 6th grade then. So I think I'd mentioned the rest of this, where we had after that, living at that agency, it was an Indian agency. My dad transferred back to Mission, South Dakota, where there was a boarding school, so we went to work there, and so that we moved back down into our part of the reservation, and then my sister and I went to that boarding school, but that was about the 8th grade, if I recall. My sister and I were there, and then my dad moved out, quit that job, moved to Laramie, Wyoming. And we lived in Laramie, Wyoming, and my sister and I went to school there. And after Laramie, we moved back down into Hastings, Nebraska. And so my sister and I went to school in Hastings, Nebraska too. And so we never did graduate from high school. And we dropped out, never went back after that. My mother got sick, and the Indian hospital was at Rosebud, so my dad moved over there. I was going to tell you about the way I got in a car wreck there in Rapid. Got thrown in jail for it. It was night. I was driving around in my dad's car. I was sleepy, so I pulled off the side of the road. I laid down or just sat back and went to sleep. And then all of a sudden I heard something knocking on the window. So I didn't know who it was, so I just started the car and took off near with a policeman. And he chased me, and then I seen his lights and could hear his siren. And like a fool, I took off and tried to get away. And I got down to the, I know I was getting back down into the town. I didn't want to do that, so I turned off on a side road and I got on a railroad track.
Oh man.
And I went down this railroad track, and the railroad bridge wouldn't hold a car in the track, so I went off the bridge.
Ooh.
Whoa.
And wrecked that car there, and broke a couple of fingers.
Were you unconscious?
Huh?
Were you unconscious during the wreck when it happened?
Yeah, I got knocked out.
Ooh.
And they had to take me to the hospital.
Wow.
And they let you recover, but then they threw you in jail.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah, that was how I got trouble there, and that was bad situation. I pay every month. It's enough to live on, pay my bills, and that's probably about all I could think of right about now. So.